question to be solved is, how do we change the thinking en masse that will lead to a transformed society that actually operates to not make climate change worse and take care of the rest of the environment? Lots of people working on the pieces of the puzzle. But the big picture, to really ask how do we change the culture, is the question is so big, most people avoid it.
Yeah, no, it is. It is. It's a huge challenge, isn't it? Because preaching to them about how it's just good for the environment, it's good for us, doesn't seem to be working, not in the traditional sense, or telling them how bad it can be, doesn't seem to be working either.
No, but it doesn't. So I'm going to share a screen and introduce some ideas. Much of this, I think, will be pretty obvious to you, so I'll go fairly quickly. In fact, some of it's obvious to most people. The point is to connect the dots. It's great that Extinction Rebellion's going on in the kids. There's more than climate change, of course. It's what we call a wicked problem. No simple solution. So it helps to have a positive goal. And one way to phrase a positive goal is to work towards achieving a life-affirming culture. How does that goal, the language of it, sit with you?
I think that's a very nice. I think it's a very nice way of framing it, isn't it? Actually,
that's good. I think there are other ways to frame it. What I say about this goal is it's good enough.
Yeah.
I don't think there's a best one. It'll do the job. Okay, so now we have a question, the marketing question. How do we see this go widely into public thinking? And my thought is that rather than try to start a big organization to do that on its own, might be better to work with established groups, because this goal encompasses the aspirations, practical actions of many people, I would think. So, good news. There are millions of groups. There are academics that care. There are businesses that care. People like yourself that are not only researchers, but also thought leaders. What if we get many of the members of these groups to champion the goal and begin to put it into emails, into lectures, into YouTube videos, whatever? Then that goal will be seen by many people in many different contexts from many different voices. So that's the marketing idea. But it's not enough to have a good idea. People need to know what's involved, yeah? So we get the meme going in, but people won't know what that means unless there's some explaining. So I developed a tool called kitchen table conversations. And one of the models, it's got a couple of modules, uses labels on beer coasters to have a extensive conversation on the topic, what makes CO2 emissions go up? And as a proxy, what makes this amount of stuff go up, because they're connected. So the way I conduct the conversation, I won't take you through it because I think you're pretty well on top of it, but show you how it goes. I ask the open question, what makes stuff go up? And somebody might say something like, something related to advertising or increased consumption. So I'll put down the label for advertising. And then I'll add the label trade agreements. People nod their heads when I say corporate control of governments. Is this big enough on the screen for you?
Oh yeah, no, I can see it.
Cool. And I point out that this obviously feeds the power elites who set it up decades ago. And then the whole thing is amplified by devotion to economic growth. So economic growth drives climate change and drives other kinds of environmental damage. cities population. So just pretty much stating the obvious at a very broad brush top level. And this whole pattern is what some people call a domination control system, rather than a partnership respect system. It's power over others rather than working for the common good.
Mm.
People could have started with the psychological side. People buy stuff because they're not happy, excess consumption. So we have retail therapy connected with some kind of inner unhappiness in people.
Mm.
And that shows up as not only retail therapy, but I've got to look important.
Mm. Status, yeah.
Thorsten Veblen,
Mm.
conspicuous consumption,
Yeah.
Queen and her yachts. Okay. Somebody said, Andrew, people like stuff. They buy it because it's cheap and available. So I added that, but I also added ignorance,
Mm.
meaning not knowing the whole pattern that we are part of and what its consequences are. So that's one of the models.
Mm. So when you do those kitchen conversations, is it something like you go around to those particular groups, Andrew, or you've been encouraging those groups to go out and use that sort of idea?
I'm beginning to encourage groups. So I've done that with individuals just on my own. Pilot tested it.
Mm.
Done it with a number of people online. And I've worked out how to do that in a way that's a little different than what I did with you. I actually have a setup so I can drag the circles in one at a time and build up the idea, which is my idea. I want to slow the conversation down, give people a chance to argue with me or say, what about this? Or
Yeah. Oh. And then the idea being once they've got to that realization, encouraging them to basically do a similar conversation with other people they know, encouraging them to act in ways that actually would stop those processes or break those links. Is that the idea?
part of the idea. Back in the Scott share. It's aimed at a different level, actually. Just coming back to this, no one individual, no changes in lifestyle are going to have very much effect on that.
Mm. No.
It's part of it. We don't put it down.
Mm.
Ultimately, we will all profoundly change our lifestyles.
Yeah.
The anthropologist, Ruth Benedict, who many decades ago, she said, look at the graph here. Each culture has something they tend to maximize. We maximize economic growth, of course. In herding cultures, it might have been maximizing cattle. Trying to find it here. And then building on that, Janella Meadows, Limits to Growth?
Oh, yes, yeah. I've never read it, but I know the premise, and yeah.
Premise is fine. Darn, I'm looking for a specific slide here. Let's see it. All right. Oh, here it is. So Danelle Meadows, she gave a famous talk called Leverage Points, Places to Intervene in the System.
Mm.
She said she got the idea spontaneously in a discussion about trade agreements or something. She went to the blackboard and said, hey, there's all these different levels of influence. Way down low is taxes and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Up at the top is people's frameworks of understanding, their mindsets, and their intentions or goals. So this is the level I want to work at as a culture.
Yeah.
But we can break that down. What's involved? So it's, yeah. Yeah, so we're looking at how the brain works. So the three aspects of people's behavior. There's their map of the world. Famous New Yorker cartoon. So in the foreground, we see stuff people know. In the background, in this particular send up, the New Yorker.
You-
There's something beyond the Hudson.
that's, that's rather wonderful. I've not seen that one. That's a really actually I must use that myself actually. So that's awesome. Yes.
I'll send it over to you.
Oh, would you mind, Andrew? That's great. No, it's a really interesting way of your own little world, you know. And then there's other stuff somewhere over there.
Yes, and going back here, part of our kitchen table conversations is a set of single pages called Looming Disasters that just highlights these kinds of images one at a time.
Mm.
So the other point is to slow it down so people actually see it. They see this is real, it's going on. Of course, we can really argue it powerfully now with the bushfires and pandemic in a sense.
Yeah.
So people's map has to include that we're in an emergency situation.
Mm.
We really need to change. It's not just something out there. I think that people are pretty concerned already, but they don't connect the dots, so they're paralyzed.
I mean, I think that's an interesting point, isn't it? And I think something that it's certainly crystallized my thinking is what's happened with this coronavirus. And particularly for us in Australia, we've had 5 months of bushfires and we had the floods, and now we've gone into this coronavirus, you know, and they're all fundamentally, as you're alluding to there, there's a common problem with all of them about what globalization, the way we live our lives, is exposing society to all these different challenges or disasters, depending on where you are. But here in Australia, we haven't stopped since, well, October, November.
Really early.
Yeah. And it hasn't stopped. And now we're going into the next bloody disaster, you know. So we've been going 6 months from one thing to the other. We haven't had any respite, really, to speak of at all. And then we've gone into the next one. And it does sort of change your perspective, I think, a little bit on actually raising those more fundamental questions you're just showing there, Andrew, which is that something's not right. The way we're operating and the scale is so fast and so quick now that it's not just hypothetical somewhere down the line, things might change. Things are changing. And sometimes you're not even getting a chance to draw breath before the next one comes along now. So I guess what I'm thinking with what you're showing there as well is that no longer are these things disconnected. They're almost merging now. They're not these different silos. And it's something I think, well, living in Australia, you'd have to be living in a cave to be oblivious to just what's happened this last 6 months. No one's been untouched by this, you know. And I think the devastating thing with the fires for us was the fact that we were, it wasn't just a fire around Sydney or a fire around Melbourne. It was everywhere was hit, which was the enormity. It was just huge. And effectively, that's almost what the coronavirus is on a global scale. Nowhere can hide from this. Nowhere in Australia could get away from the fires. And now with this coronavirus, nowhere in the world seems to be able to get away from it. I mean, I think we're a bit better placed than others, but it's certainly crystallizing, I think, in a lot of people, myself as well, about the fact that actually the way society and how we're working is just not sustainable. And what we always suspected, we knew, I mean, God, it is an emergency situation. We can't carry on. And any of the governments, and our government in particular, thinks that we're just going to go back to being how we were before and won't this be brilliant? I think are deluded. It's just we're setting ourselves up for another one in some form, I think. Yeah, it's sobering, but that's a really interesting series of slides, actually, Andrew.
I'll send you the slide deck.
Thank you.
Yes, so I think our situation is like this. We now have economic growth and we're reaching peak resources.
Mm.
So the system is going to collapse one way or the other as the environmental unravels. It won't be just off a cliff. It'll be an unraveling and regrouping and unraveling, I imagine. But it's going to go down.
Yeah.
And as it goes down, it will be very ugly unless we use some anticipatory design. We begin to design for descent and say, how do we take care of people as we prepare for a slower economy and a less resource-using economy?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Andrew. I couldn't agree more. I guess the question then, following on from some of the slides, so I'm assuming we're just bouncing ideas here, if that's all right. But I guess the question then is, who takes that leadership for the design for descent? Is it governments? Because they don't seem to be particularly keen on. They like the status quo. Is it a new government? Is it even a new political party? Is it more grassroots? Are we driving this at a lower level?
I think the answer is at the moment nobody can take that leadership.
No, I think that's a fair point.
But I'll give you my dream and then what leads up to the dream. My dream is that at some point there'll be enough public will.
Yeah.
That the government of the day, whoever it is, will convene a extended think tank, 10 days, 2 weeks, whatever. They'll bring together leaders of all parties, civil society, they'll bring academics, NGOs,
yes,
artists, environmentalists, of course. And the talk will be, how do we envision a staged descent to a steady state economy?
Yeah.
But for that to happen, there needs to be prior public will.